You're watching What's Hot on CNBC TV 18. On the 2nd of April, world leaders from the G20 countries will meet in London. This meeting takes place against the backdrop of one of the worst economic and banking crises in history. On What's Hot tonight, we ask, what can G20 nations do to stabilize the crisis? Joining us is R. Seshasai, Managing Director of Ashok Leyland from Chennai. Mr. Seshasai, many thanks for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, the financial crisis, in a sense, exposed the need for greater and more tighter regulations. Do you think a summit of this sort can help in perhaps putting in place those regulations or better coordination of regulations?
Well, I think there are many things, Harsha, which I think this G20 meet must target to achieve. And I must also mention that India's own stakes are very high in the G20 meeting. Firstly, I believe that India's own growth, whatever percentage, 5, 6, whatever percentage points that we clock up, I don't think can be achieved in isolation when the world economy is in terrible shape. So I think it's in our interest to first ensure that the leadership today pushes forward with an agenda for the economic growth of the world. And that's the first pillar on which I think the entire dialogue must take place. On that, it's very important in my view that the leadership, the global leadership, must agree on a certain amount of stimulus that will have to be provided by all the developed nations. Europeans are playing a bit coy about this. I understand that they feel that they need to be more restrained, but there needs to be certainty. 2% of GDP, 3% of GDP, 1.5% of GDP, whatever that be. I think there needs to be certainty, and unless that is given, we can't take the growth for granted, and India must push for that kind of commitment and certainty so that there is economic growth. That's the first pillar. And the second pillar I would also say is that when that happens, it's going to again result in an asset bubble. With more of stimulus, more of monetary expansion that's taking place. It's going to show up. If there is, either it's going to show up in higher consumption, which is really digging a hole and filling it up, which is not adding on to sustainable process of development, or it's going to result in an asset bubble. And India has great stakes, because if commodity prices go up, our competitiveness again is going to get eroded. And therefore, we must again press for some regulatory mechanism to ensure that this expansion, fiscal expansion, monetary expansion, do not result again in the replay of the asset bubble. That's the second. And the third point, I think, is also that we must make sure that we put in place a mechanism by which capital moves to the developed countries, to the developing countries. I can't think of a more pressing case for investment to flow. I don't think that you're going to find viable investment opportunities in the West if there is going to be degrowth in the economy. You can have more spending, but how do you create more investment if there is no growth? And the only area where investment can really happen, where it can lead to sustainable growth, is in developing economies like India. So we've got to now put our flag up and say, here is a chance for you to start creating a sustainable model, so facilitate more capital flow into developing economies like India. And the fourth and the last pillar that I would say is that hitch it on to climate change, because that's a technology which we don't have. That's the world, that's an agenda which the world is pushing. We've got to say that, can you put capital behind transfer of clean technology and facilitate that growth happening in India? I think these are the four pillars, to my mind, that we should rest our argument on G20 on.
All right, Mr. Seshasai, but how hopeful, and you've sort of clearly, outlined the four issues that India needs to take up, but how hopeful are you that we will actually see some breakthrough on all of these issues? For instance, if you're actually talking about a commitment in terms of a fiscal package, India will also need to put something on the table, but we're constrained fiscally because we don't have the kind of revenue room that we ought to be looking at this point in time to even go ahead with another fiscal stimulus package. If you're talking about a regulatory body, this is something that was discussed and debated in Washington even earlier on, and no consensus seemed to have emerged on this. So how hopeful are you that on any of these issues we're actually going to see some breakthrough, or should we just hope for more coordination between various central banks, because the central bankers will be part of this meeting?
Well, frankly, I'm not very hopeful from all that I hear. The noises that are coming out don't give me enough confidence that we're going to see anything by way of a breakthrough. But even if we now decide that we will go through this course, and I think that would be a step forward. As far as India is concerned, yes, we have to make a commitment along with the others about the quantum of fiscal stimulus that we will provide. I agree that the headroom is very limited, but on the other hand, if we push forward with a disinvestment program, which will give a little more of headroom availability, we should be able to manage that. Now, the only worrying part is that are we going to get a government at the end of this political process which is going to be capable of pushing this forward and taking leadership position internationally? Here's a great opportunity for India to take a leadership position. I don't know if it can.
One quick question, Mr. Desai. You spoke about free flow of capital and the need for it at a time like this, but there is also a lurking fear about economies getting increasingly protectionist and more inward-looking. Do you think the summit will be able to sort of reconcile these two objectives?
I think there's going to be a lot of decibel level about the nationalist interest, and there will be certainly statements made that there will be no protectionist kind of tendencies and so on. But I would suspect that when they go back to the respective capitals, and when they face the electorate and the unemployment and the local media and the issues, we are going to see a lot more of protectionist forces. And that's precisely why I'm saying that this is a time that really India should take the lead and say that this should not happen, and keep our own voice very loud and clear on this aspect. Because we have really nothing to worry about. Even in the last round, I think it was more a presentation issue. We were not pushing for protection, and we should now take the moral high ground on this issue.
All right, Mr. Seshasayee, will something emerge from the G20 meeting in London? We'll keep you updated and our viewers updated on all of that right here on CNBC TV 18. But